What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me is my great co-host Ralph Hanna. And guys, I think certainly it's a big game that we're going to be obviously assessing. Two big games, I guess, we'll be assessing in the Paraguayan World Cup qualifiers happening next week. We'll have a really special chat when Fede is back. Unfortunately, he's not here today, but we will have a good chat with him and, of course, with you, Ralph, previewing these really big World Cup qualifiers that Paraguay will have to face. A lot of team selection issues to talk about, some players that might be missing in action for the rivals. We'll get into that all next week. But what we've seen this week, it's been, relatively, I guess, from a local standpoint, a little bit quiet on that sense. But we did see some Paraguayans get into the news, the ones that are abroad, for transfers, from performances, from debuts. We've seen it all this week so far, Ralph. So yeah, I mean, how did you feel about this weekend? Hard to believe we're already at the end of the transfer window here in Europe, and September starts next week.
Yeah, and it's been a busy week, as you were saying, because we had cup games in England with three Paraguayan players involved, which I think is quite rare to have that many. And then we had midweek in the local league championship because they're trying to get some games in before the FIFA break. So we had everybody in action and a couple of things changing at the top of the table. Some teams still doing what they were doing, some slipping up, some trying to get back in the race. So there's been a lot going on, and just kind of looking to break it all down with you and start talking through some of the main points we saw this week.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, really. I think certainly when you come into a situation like this, especially, right towards, we have one more match week before the or match window, I should say, before the qualifiers. And so I think it's also a good turning point to see where we're at right now. And I think it comes at the right time because, as we record, certainly we're still seeing the two teams, Olimpia and Cerro Porteño, move up the ranks. They were able to, get their crucial wins in midweek, Cerro defeating their neighbors Nacional, and Olimpia defeating Tacuaru thanks to an own goal. But what comes in a really interesting case is what happens this weekend, because obviously I think the big game on Sunday, Olimpia and 2 de Mayo. Now, 2 de Mayo have also been kind of one of the surprise packages. They didn't win yesterday at the time of recording. They tied Ameliano 1-1, but they're still right there. They got 15 points. They're in third place, right below Cerro Porteño with 17, and who are in second, and obviously league leaders Olimpia, who are in first place with 18 points. So that game, for what it seemed to be at the beginning of the season, maybe would have seen as a formality for Olimpia, has turned now into one of the biggest games of the season for both these two teams, really, because of course a win for 2 de Mayo would continue to put themselves in the scenario of potentially challengers for the Clausura title, whereas Olimpia, under Martin Palermo, they know that getting a win like this can only increase their lead moving forward, assuming that Cerro Porteño can also try to, or at least for Olympia's sake, hope that Guarani can do them a favor and beat Cerro Porteño on the weekend, because as it seems, Ralph, it looks like with 8 games already into the season, a season has also been, league campaigns have also gone weird in the sense of like it's too early in that there have been bigger twists to all this, but it seems as though we got 3 teams that are really leading the way for this Clausura race.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Dos de Mayo, as you just mentioned, they've really lost out having not being able to beat Libertad, and now they drew with Emiliano at home, which for them their home record has been so good. We talked about it on the show before, and they're really caught out yesterday by 19-year-old Alex Servian from Emiliano, who's scored, I think, is his first senior goal. He's played a few games for Emiliano now, but only just turned 19. He scores a really good goal within 2 minutes, and that kind of put Dos de Mayo on the back foot, and they only took a point there where they would have been hoping for 3. So like you say, with Olimpia and Cerro winning their games, that's kind of really put the pressure back on Dos de Mayo to get something this weekend now if they want to try and stay in the title race. And it's an interesting game because Olimpia, remember, for everybody watching, Olimpia is trying to play to host. They wanted to be host of the Copa Sudamericana final, which is in Asunción. So they're totally renovating their stadium with money from Conmebol. And that means they haven't played a home game at all this season, like a true home game. they've been moving around, they've been using different stadiums. And so it's quite impressive what Martin Palermo's done, that they're managing to remain unbeaten. They're the only unbeaten team after 8 games. They're going into this game again. They haven't conceded. They've only conceded 2 goals, both penalties all season. So they haven't conceded from open play. A lot to do with Gaston Oliveira, the goalkeeper, who pulled off a really good save again against Taquari. So he's really been important to that, but also that defensive partnership, especially Manuel Capasso, who he got man of the match last night. And so Olympia is kind of this way Palermo's got them together, that they're unbeaten, they're very good defensively, and they haven't played a home game. All those factors has been quite impressive to where they are now. But that thing about not playing home games and being on the road a lot is that going to like wear them down over time as the season drags on? And also we've got, for example, now this is going to be on Sunday, their like third game in a week because we had the midweeks. So there's a few question marks, I think, going into this match, and it's going to be a really good game with Dos de Mayo, who we've seen can really push teams. Even the big teams. Maybe they don't always get the wins against Cerro and Olimpia Libertad has been where they've struggled, but you can definitely feel they're going to push Olimpia to the limit. And what we've seen with Olimpia is they've been so good defensively, but can they keep that up?
It's really going to be a true test of wit, you would say. As for Cerro Porteño, I mean, look, they've always viewed Guarani as a tough team, but this is a Guarani side that haven't won in their last 5 games. And, I think certainly for them, they understand if they want to go into, and more so when the draw happened between Olimpia and Cerro in the Super Clásico, they understand that they need to really pick up the pace as much as they can and not drop points. So, I know that for Cedro, it's been kind of a weird season for them so far. I think, certainly it's weird in the sense of how they got eliminated from the international tournament so early. And I feel as if though they're still a team that don't win convincingly. Yes, they get some wins here and there that feel impressive, but you just feel like they're not playing with the sort of, I would say, confidence as an Olympia is at the moment. So, do you feel as if though that might come to bite them when they do play Guarani? Because I feel like, yeah, as much as Guarani like to have been a side that's been underwhelming these last few years, they're also the team right there that could definitely um, pull the trigger in the sense of Cedro's Clausura chances.
Yeah, it's interesting with Cerro. I mean, their game against Nacional is one of those few games I can remember where they're winning comfortably at halftime, right? They were 2-0 up at halftime, whereas recently they had to equalize late on against Olympia. They scored fairly late against Taquari and their 1-0 win. And so this was slightly different, that they felt they'd taken a bit of pressure off themselves. But you're right that it's very hard. They don't seem to have like that standard 11. There's been a lot of rotation, partly because of the games, but partly because not every player is really able to put their mark on the team and say, I'm a definite starter. So, for example, you had Chico de Costa, hasn't been playing well, but he does finally get that goal against Nacional, which he's been looking for. And then another out of sort striker, Diego Churim, who's historically the top goal scorer in La Nueva Olla. He extends his record there, but it's his first goal of the season, which was really good for, I think, for Manolo Jimenez to see those two players that have been under fire getting goals, because they're probably his two best strikers if they're on form, if you're just thinking about on paper, but they both haven't played particularly well. So I think that's maybe that's a turning point for Cerro in terms of them trying to find and establish their first 11. And by the way, Diego Chirini scored his 70th goal for Cerro, so he's now tied top 4 of all time for the club, which is very impressive for for a foreign player, somebody who's been there and then gone away and then come back. So that's something just to highlight. But going into the game against Guarani, the big thing for me about Guarani is Chiqui Arce, right, on the other bench. So Chiqui Arce, manager of Cerro for so long, winning titles there. He knows them inside out. He knows a lot of those players on the team, and he might have something, a little surprise up his sleeve. But because you're right, Guarani have not played very well, but they do have the capability in certain players like Alcaraz up front, for example, to to really, match any team in the league on their day. They just really haven't been able to find that formula. And like we're talking about with all the rotations, let's see what Cerro team we get. Like, does Iturbe start because he didn't start midweek? Does Aguayo keep playing because he's been very good every time he sets foot on the pitch, but he doesn't get to play many minutes. In defense, he brought back Brock and he played him in central defense for the first time. I can't remember. It was a while with Ronaldo de Jesus. Those two hadn't played together since I think the Colo Colo Libertadores. But then he's got Quintana back from injury as well in central defense. He's been playing Baez for most of the season. So it's kind of like, oh, what am I doing now? Because now he's even starting to make changes in defense. Remember, he's made changes with goalkeeper. Jean didn't start the season, even though when he come back from injury, he was on the bench. And now he's back as the starting goalkeeper. So I mean, there's been so many changes with Cerro. I don't think we've seen them really build that style and have that team that works together the way we see with Olympia and this Olympia team that's just become very hard to beat and very hard to score against. So we'll see what happens. But I think, like you say, as we go into this title race with 1 point of difference, it does seem Olympia that are starting to show more signs that they could be the champion.
We'll have to wait and see. I think certainly we have to see also what players get called up to the senior side, because there's obviously some players that might go from there to Gustavo Alfaro's side, but we'll mention that in the next episode as we switch gears to what's been going on abroad as well, because we've seen some news. I think the first piece of news that, really in order, we're going to mention Brighton and Hove Albion, because obviously the day before their game in the EFL Cup, which we'll talk about with Enciso playing, we got the news from Renato Vitari, who was speaking on a Paraguayan radio station, saying that basically the deal for Diego Gomez to go to Brighton in January is done, that he's completed the deal and that he's headed off. He's going to finish the season with Inter Miami. Obviously, I think it's an interesting case of, someone that I think certainly has had such a really big progression ever since joining from Libertad last year. He's impressed. He's obviously had a really good Olympics after coming back from injury, and now it looks like he will become the next player for Fabian Hutzeller's side. So yeah, I mean, this is a really good move for him as well, and I think it's going to be interesting to see where he fits into the plans, because as much as it's nice to see another Paraguayan, and especially having two at the same time, which hasn't happened in a long time since Sunderland when they had Pablo da Silva and Cristian Riveros. They also got a lot of competition. Gomez is going to come in with a lot of competition because Brighton has signed a lot of players this transfer window.
They signed a lot of players and they're doing very well, right? At the time of recording, they're top of the table, well, joint top of the table. But it's a really good move, but it is one that I think we were aware of because Brighton have been tracking him for a long time. When Inter Miami signed Redondo way back in, I think it was like February, that was almost because they were getting ready for Diego Gomez was going to have to leave. About a month ago, Diego Gomez spoke after an Inter Miami game saying that his agent was in talks with Brighton. So he kind of confirmed that as well about a month ago. Now we have the agent himself saying, yeah, the deal is done. But we always had the same thing, right? That the idea is to join in January. So he's going to play in the playoffs because Miami have already qualified for the playoffs, which means what they're definitely playing through October and probably a bit of November. He'll have the World Cup qualifiers in November as well. So there's definitely going to be lots of game time for Diego Gomez before he then makes the switch to the Premier League. But like you say, it's exciting, right? The first time we've seen two Paraguayans in the same team for a while. And now we also had that matchup between two Paraguayans, which we hadn't seen for a long time as well. So it's all
Yeah,
coming together in England.
it's been a really good week, I'd say. And I think for Diego's case, I think, yeah, now the case is like, okay, where does he fit in? And also, it's going to be dependent on how Brighton do this season. I mean, they've done very well. Thankfully, they've really started a really good season so far. We saw Enciso hit the pitch actually with his Premier League debut this season in their win against Manchester United. He didn't do anything, but he was there on the pitch when they beat them 2-1 in extra time. But we did see him start in the first game of the season for him against uh third tier Crawley Town, a team from Sussex. It's obviously kind of a crosstown rivalry, not the rivalry that they have against Crystal Palace. This is a more authentic one. They ended up playing the game, and Ciso started. He ended up playing 72 minutes, And they ended up winning 4-0 on the day, but it was the second goal that obviously had everyone really talking. And CISO with a really nice run, a really nice turn, beating the beating the Crawley defender, and then obviously, just glides past everyone and then plays a really good through ball to Sarmiento to score the second. So excuse me, it looks like as though Enciso in his first start, I know he's been dealing with injury and playing a lot, but in a game like this, I think certainly it helps us, it helps Brighton fans, it helps, even his manager to really show that, he's playing with confidence and is demonstrating what it's like to play, and hopefully that he stays fit in a situation where now the big question is, what do you do with someone like him? Because like we said, Brighton have done all these signings, especially in the attack, a lot of wingers, a lot of, players that are in Cecil's position. So Cecil's really out there trying to make his case to say, I want to be a regular first team player for the side.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting that he got the minutes against Man United and then he gets the start in the League Cup, because usually the starting players in the League Cup are not being as considered for Premier League. But I don't think that's the case with Enciso. It looks like because he was dragging with that injury from the Copa America, they just want to give him more minutes, which is what he really needs, right? He just he's played a lot of football for Paraguay, but he just hasn't played a lot of football for Brighton, and so he needs regular minutes. I think that's the most important thing. And then, like you say, there's a lot of competition. Enciso's unique in what he can do. I feel that, and you see it with the second goal, right? He's such a talented player. He's very unique. He's so attacking constantly in the sense that whenever he gets the ball, he looks to go forward, and that's not great for the team sometimes because he gives the ball away a lot, which he did in the game, especially in the first half. But then you need players that can do that to progress the ball, depending on the style you're playing. But ultimately, you want players to be able to take the ball forward. It's just how he fits him in, knowing that there's so many other players. Is there space for Enciso to make some of those? I wouldn't say mistakes, because it's not that he's making mistakes, but it's more he's going to try things that are harder and of higher risk and higher reward if it comes off, but the risk of losing the ball, right? So is that question of, can they fit him in there and have other players around him in case the game breaks down and you have to win back the ball in transition and that kind of thing, which is ultimately what Garnero couldn't do in the Copa America. And Cesar was the best player in the Copa America for me, but the team couldn't handle when they were losing the ball a lot. And a lot of the balls were being lost by Enciso because he tries something different, and he's such a kind of he's just such like a creative and playmaker. So I guess that's going to be the question of Brighton and where they want to fit him in. For me, that kind of player just works so well off the bench. So we might see him getting more and more games where he comes in as the game's starting to break up and he's the one to make a difference. But it was good for him to get that many minutes on the pitch and get his assist as well. And let's just hope he can stay fit. That's been the key thing, right?
Yeah, and I think as well, like from what I've seen, is it seems like he's also just trying his best to, and this isn't a critique of him because obviously what he did the other day was nice, but it seems like he's continuing, and this has been a constant issue, I would say, is him trying to shoot from distance. I admire him doing that because he's done that a couple times already, but do you feel as if though maybe it's just not necessary for him to do it? I feel like maybe just yeah, I mean, I feel like in a situation where maybe you don't need to shoot, that you could just you can play the pass to a player who's open, or just try and beat the defender even better. Like if you have that space, you go for it. But that's also been kind of a nuance in a way. I mean, again, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it shows that hey, if he wants to do it, he'll do it.
Yeah, he's very single-minded, which we've seen, and again, so it is whether you can afford to have that in your team or not. So I think he had 6 shots maybe in the game, and most of them are from outside of the box, and that follows on from what he was doing in the Olympics, in the Copa America. We saw the same thing. That's just the way he wants to try and play. And obviously, yeah, in the world of XG and statistics, I'm sure statistically he's not making the best choice. I don't know. I'm not an analyst, but I would guess, right? There's better options usually than shooting from 30 yards. But again, that's the whole point. That's what he brings, is something unique and very different. And you don't see many players that will consistently try that, because they get it trained out of them almost, with especially in the Premier League, like all the players come through academies and very similar training setups. So it does add something different. But yeah, I know what you mean. I think he's been criticized before of not always making the right decision. And so this is where you see some of that decision making, just with the shooting as one example.
Yeah, I mean, look, if he wants to get his Puskas, I mean, so be it. I mean, if he's just trying his best to do it, and hey, maybe one day it'll happen. Maybe one day, and we'll all feel as if though we look back in this and say, like, okay, maybe he wanted to do that for a specific reason. As we also saw, also midweek, we saw a really rare occasion. We saw for the fourth time ever, two Paraguayans face against each other. It was obviously we saw Nottingham Forest take against Newcastle United. Obviously, when this draw actually happened, Ralph, there was the rumor that Sosa had not been officialized as of yet to Nottingham Forest, so there was the rumor that we would see Sosa versus Almiron, but the rumors also came about that Almiron might leave. We don't know if that's still the case. We would assume that he will stay put in Newcastle at least until the winter, but we did end up seeing it. It was for the fourth time ever. Just going back, some of the matches that we've seen from that, we saw Wigan and Sunderland take on each other in 2010. That was when Wigan had Antonin Alcaraz taking on Pablo da Silva, and it 1-1. Alcaraz getting the goal. Newcastle against West Ham back in 2019 was Miguel Mirón against Fabián Balbuena. We saw Balbuena get a goal as well. In the third game, it was Newcastle against Brighton. They won 4-1. Newcastle won 4-1. We saw Almiron take on Enciso in the famous, if you remember, the little scuffle that they had between each other. So it's been a highlight in at least of these three games. So we were hoping that there was going to be the case for this game, but it was, I guess, obviously particular because it was Ramon Sosa's first game as a Nottingham Forest player. He got the start. So he didn't even come off the bench, Ralph. He actually got the start, and certainly it was impressive from what we saw. Both of them actually played well. It started out very well for Newcastle. Almiron was able to pick up the ball and he played the ball to Isak. Isak obviously he shot the goal towards the goalkeeper Carlos Miguel, and then it was Willock that got the first goal inside 30 seconds or something, like very very quickly. But then we obviously saw Ramon Sosa do his thing. We obviously saw him really take charge, I would say. I mean, again, it wasn't impressive in the sense that he obviously stood out and wowed everyone, but he was really particularly good. He supposedly got the assist. It was obviously the ball that was rebounded from him from Jota to score the equalizer. But you're already seeing a Sosa that is kind of imposing. He's taking set pieces. He actually played a really nice ball right towards, I think it was the end of the first half that no one was able to connect. But relatively speaking, and Newcastle ended up as winners, by the way, if anyone wanted to know about that, they ended up winning on penalties. But ultimately, and we'll start with Sosa. For someone that's played his first hour or so in European football, he impressed. And I think it shows that, for someone like Nuno Espirito Santo, that he's taking set pieces, that he's being imposing, and he's trying to really become effective and getting the start. Nevertheless, that shows that they really are putting the trust in someone that they paid significant amount of money for, but also hasn't played in a long time, ever since the Copa America.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It's funny you mentioned the Enciso and Almiron scuffle, because in that game you did feel that it was Enciso wanting to take the place of Almiron in the national team, and now you had Sosa and Almiron, and it's the same. It's a very similar thing, that they're still really fighting for a place in the national team. And I thought Almiron, like you said, did put in a really good performance. He's in this limbo period where it sounds like Newcastle need him to go for maybe for PSR or whatever. Eddie Howe maybe doesn't want him to go that much in terms of a player, but there's finances on top of that seems to be what might be pushing him to the door. And so he just responded the way I think Almiron has really done. I think I've mentioned it before. He's just a winner. Like he won everything before he went to Newcastle, and it's just he's always been that kind of player. And so I thought he put in quite a good shift, knowing that literally in front of him, because Sosa started on the left, him on the right, you have this kid that's trying to take his place. And then talking about Ramon Sosa specifically, yeah, it was really interesting to see. One, he was very bright and very positive in the press, which is interesting because usually having a new player to be the trigger and to lead the press could be a bit complicated, no? But he seemed to do it, and it seemed to be working very well. But then I think there are a couple of things that showed. One, that he hasn't played for 2 months, right? He hasn't played since the Costa Rica game, the Paraguay Costa Rica game in Austin. He got, when he faced up Trippier in that first like 20-30 minutes, he just looked to go backwards and secure possession. And if you watch him in Talleres, he would never have done that. He would have just tried to beat his fullback, right? Obviously, respect for Kieran Trippier and the player that he is, but I think it was also a bit of, okay, I'm still not ready. And there may be a difference in character to Julian Cesar, right? That we're just talking about, that wants to try everything different. I think Sosa is much more tactically aware, and he wants to be much more, I would say like secure in possession and that kind of thing. But then what we saw, like you were saying, he was on set pieces and he grows into the game, and he does win a duel against Trippier right towards halftime, and then gets this huge cheer from the crowd, and you can see that kind of lifted, I think, a little bit in him. And he was very bright in the second half, in the parts that he got before he was subbed off. So I mean, I think ultimately it was a nice debut for him. Hopefully, he's shown enough to be considered for Premier League match squads, and then we'll see as time goes on where how much play he gets. Because I think at the moment he really is battling. He's not a first choice winger because of the players Forest have in that position, but he's hopefully going to be in those match day squads, and we start to see him get more and more minutes, because it's a very similar situation, I think, with Sosa and Enciso. Both is they just need a lot of game time to make sure they kind of stay match fit, and they can play at this level, because I think that's what really hurt Enciso as well, right? He found it very hard physically once he started playing a lot of games together. He started a lot of games in that first season. And so is that kind of minute load, you just need to build him in slowly off the bench, Sosa. But I think he did enough. I hope he's done enough to be in the match day squads for the Premier League.
Yeah, obviously they'll play this weekend, all three of them, and I think certainly we'll see what they do in their final games before they go to Paraguay, because that's also a big issue too. I think Alfaro was probably looking at these games and thinking, how am I going to make this work? Basically, how am I going to make three players that play in the Premier League work together in comparison to what other managers haven't been able to do, or even so, who's going to be the sacrifice? Because again, we'll have that discussion afterwards. But I think looking at these performances, I think certainly Alfaro has to make a case of like which one he has to sacrifice, or if he finds the way to make all three work. Because again, Sosa has impressed so far, at least in the sense of what he does for Paraguay. He kind of took that baton when Enciso was out, becoming one of their more exciting players. Almiron has been criticized for not showing as much with the national team, and Enciso is kind of an enigma that he probably is Paraguay's best player. So it's like, what do you do there, really, Ralph? It's a good problem to have, but also one that I think also kind of frustrates. Is kind of a bit of an issue that Alfaro will have to deal with, especially as his first game.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a good problem to have, and I think this is really the moment, will be the moment for Alfaro of what to do with um now having a good enough team, but it's getting them to work together and to click. Whereas I think before, if we are honest, Paraguay just wasn't really good enough. After some of the generational changes, they just didn't have a good enough base of players. They maybe had Almiron, but they didn't really have a striker. The defense wasn't quite working. They couldn't find fullback. Okay, they still can't find fullbacks. But now he really does have quite a quality team that he's bringing together, because he's brought Sanabria back. So you do have another top five player. Alderete just had a really good Copa America. So you do have a player in the top five leagues in central defense. So suddenly it's like, well, actually, I've got quite a lot of material here. And Alfaro's big thing is being that motivator. And so can he motivate players to come off the bench? Because that might be what he has to end up doing, right? He might have to say to Sosa, hey, you know what? You're not going to start because I need Almiron to defend, because he's very defensive. Or it might be, hey, Almiron, you're more experienced, but I need you in the second half as legs get tired. So it's a big that's going to be the key point for Alvaro, I think, of showing those motivational skills now that he has such a good team.
100%. I think it's going to be very interesting. We'll have that discussion when we do next week. As we close out here with one more segment, we obviously have some Paraguayans playing in a World Cup. The women's team, the U20 side, will be kicking off their tournament in Colombia this weekend. They have a really tough group, Ralph. I think it's a really tough group to really go into this. And, they'll start off against Morocco on the 1st of September, and then they take on Spain 3 days later, and then finishing off with the United States in Bogota. So it's a it's a really interesting group. I think certainly looking at the way that this group is formatted, you have obviously it's very similar to I think the Euros where you have the top two that go to the knockout stage and then the four best teams that are in third place also go to the knockout stage. And I think Paraguay realistically are trying to really strive for that third place spot. I think they understand that maybe they won't have enough to beat Spain. Maybe they won't have enough to beat the United States. So really, that first game against Morocco is the one to go for. And they have an interesting squad. A lot of players that are playing in Brazil. Five, if I last counted, a couple in one in Argentina, one in Everton, in Chile, and then the majority of also in Paraguay. So I think Fabio Fukumoto is going to really have to work with a lot, and could indeed surprise some people in this group.
Yeah, I think you've kind of called it there that the key games is opener on Sunday against Morocco in their first under 20s World Cup. Is definitely the winnable game for Paraguay, and also being the first game falls perfectly for them because I think you just mentioned like USA is going to be in Bogota, so imagine like those games coming together, and then you have to go and play the US at altitude. It's going to be a really struggle, I think, physically because it's totally different the preparation of under 20s women's football in Paraguay compared to the US. I mean, that's still miles apart as much as the good work that they're trying to do there. There's some exciting players in there. So Adriana Martinez is the captain, and then Fatima Acosta, the forward. She was the top scorer in the Sudamericano with 7 goals, and she plays at Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo have just won the women's under 20s tournament as well, so she comes into this off the back of winning a trophy, and she's really going to be the key player, I think, and could be the difference maker. And then it was interesting. There's been a lot of interviews this week of the players and the coach as well, Fabio Fukumoto, talking about what they're trying to do. And I mean, everybody's saying about get out of the group, get out of the group. They are trying to do that. They did play a friendly, I think 2 days ago or 3 days ago against the Netherlands and lost 4-0. They were 3-0 down at halftime. And just to give you an idea of where the Netherlands are, they only just got beaten by Spain in the qualifiers. So thinking about that second game against Spain, you can already see that it's going to be a real tough challenge to try and take something from there. So I think the big focus is the Morocco game. To win that, that's what they really want to do, is win that and then see where they can go with the other matches. Just a reminder, the Paraguay under 17s, well, it was an under 16s team where Fukumoto went as assistant coach. They went to Turkey to play a tournament recently. They drew with the US under 16s 0-0 in the final game. So just to give you an idea of they would be ready to try and dig in and get 0-0 draws. I think you could see that in those two games, which might end up being what they're doing. But definitely the Morocco game's a big one on Sunday, and good luck to them because it's really interesting to see that you have 2 or 3 of these players, I think, in the under 20s that might be able to make the jump to the senior side quite soon. And then you already have, I think, in the senior side, the history of players that went to World Cups together at under 17s, under 20s, and now looking for the senior World Cup. So just bringing in more players with that kind of global international experience, that's going to be really useful.
So do you fancy their chances? Do you think they can do it, or do you think it'll be a bridge too far?
I think it'll be a bridge too far. Like Spain and USA in your group is very difficult. But I think the main thing is to see. I'm really interested to see like what they do against Morocco, where they're going to be on the front foot and trying to attack, and then how they show how they can play where they're not on the front foot and trying to defend. And so, can they do something against Spain and US? Maybe they can't avoid defeat, but see something more positive than the 4-0 reverse to Netherlands that we just saw.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Hopefully, there are some exciting players that could make the ranks up to the senior team. And again, the Women's World Cup is also coming soon in this new format happening in Brazil. So it'd be really nice for them to qualify for their first ever one near, at their neighboring country. And yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens as we close out another great episode of Guarani Vision for myself, Roberto Rojas, and Ralph Hanna. Thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.